The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's not speculation, that's not an accusation from a critic. That's the opening of a book, published in 1928, written by a man who had lived to be 103 years old, long enough to see everything he built become invisible. His name was Edward Bernays, and he didn't hide what he was doing. In 1990, Life magazine named Edward Bernays one of the 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century. Not as a politician, not as an inventor, not as a scientist, as a man who taught governments and corporations how to shape what you think. Here's the strange part. You've probably never heard of him, but you've heard of his uncle, Sigmund Freud. Bernays was Freud's nephew. Twice over, his mother was Anna Freud, Sigmund's sister. His father's sister was Martha Bernays, Sigmund's wife. That's not a coincidence. That connection would define his career. You've heard of propaganda. Bernays literally wrote the book on it. That's not a metaphor. In 1928, he published it. You've heard of public relations. Bernays invented the term. He started calling himself a public relations counsel because propaganda had become a dirty word. So why don't you know his name? Because the most successful propaganda is the kind you don't notice. What you're about to see isn't a documentary about conspiracy theories. It's a documentary about a man who built a system and then documented every piece of it. In his own words, his books are available on archive.org. For free. You can read them tonight. His interviews are in archives. His techniques are taught in universities. Everything I'm about to tell you can be verified. That's not the scandal. The scandal is that none of it is hidden, and almost no one knows. Vienna, 1891. Edward Bernays is born into an unusual family. His uncle, Sigmund Freud, is developing theories about the unconscious mind. The idea that human beings are driven by desires and fears they don't consciously recognize. Freud believed individuals could be understood through their hidden motivations. Bernays would take that same idea and apply it to crowds, to populations, to entire nations. But first, he needed to learn his craft. America, 1917. The United States enters World War I. President Woodrow Wilson faces a problem. He needs to convince the American public to support a war that most had wanted to avoid. So Wilson creates something unprecedented. The Committee on Public Information, known as the Creel Committee, after its chairman, George Creel. Its mission, manufacture enthusiasm for war. George Creel later wrote about what they accomplished. In his own words, it was the fight for the minds of men, for the conquest of their convictions. That's not criticism. That's Creel describing his own work. With pride, the Creel Committee didn't just inform the public, it manufactured consensus. 75,000 four-minute men delivered short propaganda speeches in movie theaters across the country. Posters, films, press releases, coordinated messaging. By 1918, the same nation that had voted for Wilson's promise to keep them out of war was sending their sons to die in it. The CPI proved something that would change the 20th century. Public opinion wasn't fixed. It could be manufactured. Edward Bernays, 26 years old, worked for the committee. He was assigned to the Latin American section of the Foreign Press Bureau. He traveled to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. And he watched everything. Years later, in his 1965 autobiography, Biography of an Idea, Bernays explained what he learned. There was one basic lesson I learned in the CPI, that efforts comparable to those applied by the CPI to affect the attitudes of the enemy, of neutrals, and the people of this country could be applied with equal facility to peacetime pursuits. Read that again. What could be done for a nation at war could be done for organizations and people in a nation at peace. If propaganda works in wartime, why not peacetime? If you can manufacture consent for war, what else can you manufacture consent for? Bernays was about to find out. 1928. Bernays publishes his most famous book. He calls it, simply, Propaganda. The title alone is remarkable. Today, no one would publish a book proudly called Propaganda. But Bernays wasn't hiding. He was explaining. This is the opening. Chapter 1. Page 1. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. He continues, "We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized." Read that carefully. He's not describing a conspiracy. He's describing a system and arguing that it's necessary. Bernays' reasoning went like this. Democracy creates a problem. Millions of people must make decisions about things they don't fully understand. How do you govern a society where everyone has a vote? But most people don't have time to study every issue. His answer, you don't govern their minds directly. You govern their environment. You shape what they see, what they hear, what they feel. And then you let them choose, based on the reality you've constructed for them. In the same book, Bernays wrote, "Our invisible governors are, in many cases, unaware of the identity of their fellow members in the inner cabinet. They govern us by their qualities of natural leadership, their ability to supply needed ideas, and by their key position in the social structure. And here's the part that should keep you awake at night. We are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, a trifling fraction of 120 million, who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. A trifling fraction, that's who decides what you think, according to the man who built the system." Bernays never stopped refining his ideas. In 1947, 2 years after the concentration camps were liberated, Bernays published an essay. He called it The Engineering of Consent. In it, he wrote, "The engineering of consent is the very essence of the democratic process, the freedom to persuade and suggest. The very essence of the democratic process. That's what he called manufacturing consent." Think about that phrase. Engineering consent. Not earning consent. Not requesting consent, engineering it, like you'd engineer a bridge or a machine. Bernays wasn't apologizing for what he'd built. He was rebranding it, and it worked. After World War I, the word propaganda started to become toxic. People had seen what it could do. And then the Nazi regime showed the world what propaganda could become when taken to its logical extreme. After the Holocaust, nobody wanted to be associated with propaganda. So Bernays did something remarkable. He changed the name. What had been called propaganda became public relations. What had been called a propagandist became a public relations council. The techniques didn't change. The goals didn't change. The methods didn't change. Only the words did. Bernays later explained this himself. "When I came back to the United States, I decided that if you could use propaganda for war, you could certainly use it for peace. And propaganda got to be a bad word because of the Germans using it. So what I did was to try and find some other words. So we found the words Council on Public Relations." He didn't change what he was doing. He changed what he called it, and that made all the difference. before propaganda, before the engineering of consent. There was Crystallizing Public Opinion, published in 1923. It was the first textbook on public relations ever written. In it, Bernays explained how to reach people who won't listen to logic. People's minds have logic-proof compartments which must be approached by means beyond the rationale. Logic-proof compartments. If someone won't respond to facts, you bypass the facts entirely. You go straight to emotion, to symbols, to unconscious desires. He wrote, "It is the Public Relations Council's capacity for crystallizing the obscure tendencies of the public mind before they have reached definite expression, which makes him so valuable. In other words, the best propagandist doesn't follow public opinion. He shapes it before people even know they have an opinion." By 1923, Edward Bernays had written the playbook. By 1928, he had explained the philosophy. The only thing left was to prove it worked. So far, we've heard Bernays explain what he wanted to do. Manufacture consent, engineer public opinion, create an invisible government of people who understand, as he put it, the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. But philosophy is one thing, results are another. Did it actually work? In 1929, Bernays was hired to solve an impossible problem. How do you get women to smoke cigarettes? When smoking in public is considered scandalous. His solution would become one of the most famous PR campaigns in history. He called it Torches of Freedom, and it would prove that everything he wrote about was real. In Part 2, we'll see what happened when Bernays put his theories into practice. The campaigns that changed America, the consequences no one predicted, and the moment his techniques fell into the hands of Joseph Goebbels. He wrote about that too. If you want to verify everything you've just heard, there's a link in the description to the full text of propaganda on archive.org. It's free. You can read it tonight. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss Part 2. And remember, the invisible government he described is still invisible, unless you know where to look.